Welcome everyone to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and this video dives into the actual construction of the White House. Who designed it and who constructed it. Now the focus will be on the enslaved labor that helped to construct the White House, as well as the Capitol building. It will dive into other sources of labor that helped put the United States capital city together. Although the American Revolution broke the colonies, now states, away from the British government, politically, the founders were still heavily influenced because of cultural ties with Europe. So when the designing of Washington, D.C. came up, George Washington himself gravitated to European surveyors and engineers. The man who laid out the plan for the city was Pierre Charles L'Enfant. Although the first president did hire a Pennsylvania surveyor, Major Andrew Ellicott III, to survey the site of Washington, D.C., remember Ellicott's name because it will reappear in a few minutes. Not only was the chief engineer French, but Washington and Jefferson wanted L'Enfant to hire German workers to build the city because of their skill at large construction projects. In 1791, just 1 year into the building of the Capitol, the commissioners hired to oversee the construction, and L'Enfant had difficulty getting German or European workers to sail to the United States in order to construct the District of Columbia. By 1792, the idea of hiring Germans had withered away, and environmental factors began to create availability of the enslaved population to step in as part of the main workforce. Virginia's soil had been depleted by planters growing tobacco as the major cash crop of the state. Additionally, tobacco was very labor-intensive, which kept the slave populations of plantations occupied most of the year. However, planters started to turn toward the less labor-intensive growing of wheat, including Washington himself. This freed up the slave populations in Virginia and Maryland to be hired out, Virginia enslaving the most people with around 300,000 in the 1790s, and Maryland having around 100,000. Planters now hired out their slaves to work on the city in the slow months for wheat growing, or if they could do without them for the year, the Washington, D.C. commissioners would rent the slaves on a yearly basis. The slaves who worked on the Capitol would be housed in a barracks, fed a diet of corn, beef, and pork, and the commissioners also created a hospital to take care of injured workers, black or white. Some of the most common jobs for the enslaved was clearing the land in preparation for laying the foundation of buildings, which slaves also did. They excavated land in order to create foundations and laid out streets. However, one of the most extensive jobs that slaves had was working in the stone quarry that supplied all of the stone for the White House and Capitol building. Cutting out huge hunks of stone and hauling them to the closest waterway, which was then transported to the building site and then unloaded, which took 2 days in some instances to unload one transport, with 6 slaves handling the stone cargo. Interestingly, one of the gentlemen that owned one of the boats that transported the stone was a free black man, who it is assumed made a good living using his boat in the construction of the city. Along with the extensive stonework, 1 million bricks were ordered to be made to construct buildings. The job of creating bricks fell mostly on enslaved women and adolescent slaves who could make 5,000 bricks a day off-site, most likely on their owner's land, then transported to the building site. One of the most amazing stories that I want to relay to you is the story of Benjamin Banneker, who worked with Major Andrew Ellicott III to survey the location for the city. I will use historian Clarence Lusane's excerpt from his book, The Black History of the White House, to tell that story. Banneker was born to free parents on November 9, 1731, near Baltimore, Maryland. Banneker's ancestry was unusual for the period. His white grandmother, Molly Welsh, had been an indentured servant from England who finished her 7 years of servitude and bought a farm near the Patapsco River. She eventually saved enough to purchase 2 slaves. Reportedly, one of those was named Banneker, later called Banneker and then anglicized to Banneker. One can only speculate about life on the farm, but apparently it was so harmonious that after several years of prosperity, Molly freed both Banneker and the other enslaved individual. Within a short time, Molly Welsh and Benjamin Banneker married, and eventually raised a family of 4 children, the oldest a girl named Mary. As an adult, Mary married a black man who had been captured in Africa just as her father had. However, after he converted, joined the Church of England, and was baptized with the name Robert, he was released from slavery. A free black man, Robert married Mary Banneker and adopted Mary's last name as his own. Mary and Robert Banneker had 4 children as well, 1 boy and 3 girls. They named their boy Benjamin after his grandfather. Robert displayed the same industrious spirit as his in-laws and soon owned 120 acres of farmland in the area where Benjamin and his sisters would grow up. Molly took a particular liking to the boy and began to give him special tutoring. She had him study and read the Bible and later sent him to an integrated school nearby. He became a bookworm. As he grew, his studies expanded to include mathematics and astronomy, and his intellectual talents became known throughout the area. He earned a living farming tobacco. Benjamin Banneker was 60 years old and living on his farm in Patapsco Valley, Maryland, when he was hired to survey Washington, D.C. He and Major Andrew Ellicott arrived in the area on February 17, 1791, and set up camp. Although he had little experience conducting field surveys, Ellicott needed Banneker for his knowledge of astronomy. His principal duties included monitoring the instrument known as the astronomical clock and recording and studying the movement of the stars and sun. Banneker played an essential role in laying out the city's boundaries. He was paid $60 for approximately 3 months of work he conducted in 1791, a substantial sum of money. When the commissioners failed to attract the Germans they were hoping to be the carpenters of the city, James Hoban, an Irish immigrant and slave owner, entered an architectural design contest for the White House, which he won. Washington hired him to construct the extensive mansion, and Hoban used his skilled slaves as laborers. He brought Peter, Tom, Ben, and Harry, and his assistant, Pierce Purcell, brought Daniel. All were skilled enslaved laborers that were carpenters. They put together a lot of the infrastructure of the building. From the commissioner's records, slaves like Peter the carpenter earned £6, 16 shillings, and 6 pence at a per diem rate of 6 shillings, the same rate being paid to Peter Smith, a white indentured servant of Purcell. However, unlike the indentured servants, Peter the carpenter's wages were paid directly to James Hoban, his owner, and he never saw those wages. When we look at these historic homes, it's always important to understand its construction. It can tell us so much about the time period in which it was built. From Peter the carpenter to Benjamin Banneker, the Black history of Washington, D.C.'s construction is a great story and demonstrates how ingrained African American history is in Washington's history. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and you may have learned something you might not have known previously. Please consider subscribing to support the channel. Thank you all again, and have a great day.